Okay, everybody, welcome to part two of this discussion, the full story behind the Assyrian dispersion of Jews. We're now going to look at King Hezekiah. And remember, when we talk about kings in ancient Israel, we're talking about local tribal chieftains, is all they were. But anyway, King Sennacherib, that we talked about in the last video, had reigned over Assyria from 705 to 681 BC. Under his rule, the capital of Assyria was moved from Dur Sharukin to Nineveh. 4 years into his reign in 701 BC, he sacked the Israelite city of Lachish in Judah, but failed to take the capital of Jerusalem. He should have done this, though, because he was soon to receive a lot of trouble from Judah's king Hezekiah, who ruled from thence. But before we get into that, let's look at some background of Mr. Hezekiah. He was, according to the not-so-holy book, the son of Ahaz and the 13th king of Judah. His reign is estimated to have been between 715 and 686 BC. According to the not-so-holy book, Hezekiah had witnessed the destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel by King Sargon's Assyrian army that we talked about in the last video, and was king of Judah during the invasion and siege of Jerusalem by Sennacherib. So he wanted revenge for that, let alone what was now going on with Assyria. Hezekiah enacted sweeping religious reforms, we're told, including a strict mandate for the sole worship of Yahweh. He was in league with the priestly bloodline, in other words, knowing that that was going to help consolidate his power if he was a religious leader. He prohibited the veneration of all other deities within the temple of Jerusalem. So everybody thought, oh, this man is truly led by God. Let's rally behind him. What a bunch of hooey. We're also told in the not-so-holy book that it was during Hezekiah's reign that the prophets Isaiah, Hosea, and Micah had lived, just to put that in perspective. The name Hezekiah in Hebrew actually means strengthened by Yahweh. Oh, isn't that quaint? In general, he is, and ever has been, held in very high esteem by religious Jews. The main reason for this is the fact that in 2 Kings 18:5, it's said of him that he, quote, trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel, so that there was no one like him among all the kings of Judah after him, or among those who were before him. That's funny because, that was said of David and several others, so what a bunch of crockery. That was said of Moses, too. No one as great as him, before him or after him. Get the fuck. But anyways, he was quite the Yahwist, so he was beloved back then and has been beloved ever since in Jewland because he licked Mr. Mass Psychopath Murdering Yahweh's ass. Anyway, as always, though, that's what works for Bible dupes, right? He licked Yahweh's ass, therefore he's a good person. You don't have to look at his record, at the things he said and did. He licked Yahweh's ass, he's a good person. In fact, it doesn't matter what the record says about what he said and did. If he licked Yahweh's ass, automatically he's good, in spite of the fact that when you look at the record of the individual, he was a piece of shit, right? And you can do that, and I've done that earlier on this channel, again and again and again, with one biblical character after another, showing that upon close inspection, they're all pieces of shit. Every one of them, right? Abraham was a pimp, pimped out his own frickin' wife, as did his son Isaac, did the same thing, pimped out his wife. Abraham did that twice. Um, David was a mass murdering frickin' psychopath bastard, as was Moses. Uh, but yet, in Bible dupe land, Jews, Gentiles, Christians, Muslims alike, all hail these biblical characters as heroes because it said of them that they were great followers of Yahweh. Well, Yahweh was a psychopath himself, but yet in Bible dupedom, because the Bible says that Yahweh was good, that he's the source of all goodness, therefore anyone who follows Yahweh is good. You see how fucking twisted the philosophy of that book is, and all of its, dumbass dupes lap it up, guys. It doesn't matter if you look at their records and say, hey, wait a minute, no, these people weren't good. Look what they did. It doesn't matter. They brush it off. They make light of some of the most heinous crimes that you could muster up, right? Mass murdering like Bibi is now doing. And even though Bibi is not a professing religious person, he's quoted a couple times from the Torah so that he can get some nominal dumbass people behind him. But he's not religious, right? But the fact that he's considered a chosen one for, the Christian Zionist crowd, that's enough for them. God is leading them. He's got a special plan for his people, even if they're not religious at all, let alone accept Jesus. God's got a plan. The mind fuckery. Do you see why they came up with, their little Hebrew religion? Why they had to have their own unique Hebrew God? You see why they did it? It worked then, and for a great many, it still works today, doesn't it? It's propaganda. That's all it is. Anyway, it's important to point out that Sargon II, which I talked about in the last video, is said to have died in 705 BC while driving the Cimmerians, that's Cimmerians, driving the Cimmerians from ancient Iran, where they were attacking Sargon's Persian and Median vassals. But one has to wonder if members of the tribe were behind his death, since he had previously vanquished them. Yeah, absolutely. Any major event like that, all through history, their hand has been involved in it. Every time, guys. Every frickin' time. Every major world event. Every, traumatic event. If you don't see him there, keep looking. You'll see him. Anyway, between the death of Sargon II and the succession of his son Sennacherib to the throne, in the midst of the temporary political instability in Assyria, Hezekiah sought to throw off his subservience to the Assyrians, as always, right? In typical Zio fashion. The biblical record in 2 Kings 18:7 tells us that Hezekiah ceased to pay the Assyrian tribute imposed on his father. Surprise, surprise. And thereby, quote, rebelled against the king of Assyria and served him not, but entered into a league with Egypt, as we will soon see from the book of Isaiah. Now, isn't that interesting? The tribe had formerly hated Egypt and constantly sought to overthrow it. But by this stage of the game, Egypt was now soft putty in the hands of the Zios, who sought to employ this country to do its dirty work. Today's friends were yesterday's enemies and vice versa in Jewland, right? Whenever they can use you for something, oh, they'll buddy up with you. But if you're not kissing their ass at any given moment down the line, where you were their friend the other day, now you're going to be their enemy. They're going to sick somebody else on you. Fucking disgusting, vomit-inducing pigs. They always have been, ever will be. I got to point this out, too, though. Another schizophrenic little belief of, the Christian world. Christians believe, according to the teaching of Jesus, that you are to love your enemy, be peacemakers, don't be rabble-rousers, right? That's actually not the real Jesus talking there. That's just the rhetoric he used to suck his people in, his followers, He was a goddamn insurrectionist, right? But nevertheless, though, the Christian world swallows that rhetoric and believes that Jesus came to bring peace, right? They call him the Prince of Peace. When in fact he said, think not that I came to bring peace. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. Nevertheless, though, they think he's the Prince of Peace, and they think that you need to employ the turn the other cheek policy, right? And yet, when they read stories of people like King Hezekiah, who rebelled by not paying tribute, somehow that's okay. You see the contradiction? When it comes to paying taxes, Christ actually said, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God's. Jesus was telling his followers to pay their taxes, which, again, is bullshit because as an insurrectionist, he was against paying taxes. He had to say that because he knew that there were listeners that would turn him in as a rebel, against the Romans if he didn't say that. So there was just rhetoric. But nevertheless, Bible dupes follow that. They think that that's what you're supposed to do, even if the taxes are unfair. You're supposed to do it because, for God's sake, you're not to be a rebel rouser. You're to, as Paul said in Romans 13, right? You're to lick the ass of the secular rulers. God has put them there. What a bunch of shit. It's all doublespeak, right? But nevertheless, though, this is what Bible dupes believe. They follow these superficial teachings of Christ that he didn't even mean, and they think that that's what constitutes being a true Christian. Pay your taxes, right? And yet, here's Mr. fucking Hezekiah rebelling like, every other Jew king has done, right? That's what the whole insurrectionist movement was about, is not paying taxes. You gotta love their duplicitous belief system. It's which stems from the Bible itself. Anyway, notice how the Jewish priesthood didn't want any part of this, seeing it as a compromise with the heathen and a lack of faith in the great Yahweh monster. The priesthood didn't want this alliance with Egypt because, Egypt was not worshiping Yahweh. They were still worshiping their heathen gods centuries on end. The Zios had an influence therein, had even served as pharaohs, the Hyksos, right? And they attempted to bring them over to monotheism. Couldn't do it. They succeeded here and there for a time, but Egypt always kicked their asses out. So the priesthood was always opposed to alliances with Egypt because of that one reason, right? They wouldn't accept the one true God. And so that's why you have passages like this, for example, in Isaiah 30, verses 1 and 2, which says, woe to the obstinate children, declares the Lord, to those who carry on plans that are not mine, forming an alliance, but not by my spirit, heaping sin upon sin, who go down to Egypt without consulting me, who look for help to Pharaoh's protection, to Egypt's shade for refuge. Imagine that. So here's the priesthood, the priestly line, putting these words in Yahweh's mouth, condemning what, kings like Hezekiah was trying to do, form an alliance with Egypt. No, no, no. Doesn't matter that you might be able to sway them in your direction and get assistance from them. They worship heathen gods, so reject them, says the priesthood, right? Anyway, though Hezekiah expected the Egyptians to come to his aid, it did him no good. Assyria still prevailed, resulting in an invasion of Judah by Sennacherib, as we talked about in the last video, and as we read in 2 Kings 18:13-16. I don't need to read that again. We covered that. So anyway, Hezekiah got what he deserved. He was made to eat humble pie. But then we're given this little twist to the story. During the siege, according to 2 Kings 19:35, the angel of the Lord killed 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in a single night by a plague. By a plague? Is it not safe to assume that if there's any truth to this story, it must have been an early example of Jewish supremacist biological warfare, right? I'm sure it wasn't a great number that size, but yeah, I'm sure they engaged in early biological warfare, poisoning the wells or whatever, right? If there's any truth to the story, I wouldn't doubt it. That's right, in league with the little modus operandi. This supposed divine act was performed simply because Hezekiah was made to pay taxes to the Assyrians. Are you freaking kidding me? And this is what made the Assyrians the enemies of the Lord and his chosen ones. They weren't letting them get away with what no one else was able to get away with, right? Or, in other examples in the Bible, they became this, that, or the other Gentile city, became enemies because they wouldn't willfully give their land over to them that they wanted to steal. They're enemies and must be conquered. Kill everything that breathes, said Yahweh. When Yahweh told them to do that in this, that, and the other city, almost every time it was simply because they were in their way. Kill them and steal their land. This is divine justice. Yahweh is a just God, Bible dupes, isn't he? Yes, yes. The Bible's just overflowing with stories of his great justice. Steal their land. If they won't give it to you, kill them. Everything, including the cattle, the sheep, the goats, the young suckling infants. Rip up the wombs of the pregnant women. Kill them all. Show mercy to none. Make no covenant with them. And steal their land. You shall reap the fields that you did not sow. On and on and on. Yahweh is definitely a just God. Why, he's the epitome of justice. Funny how this same just God doesn't intervene to save millions of Gentiles who are enslaved by the fraudulent Jewish banking system in the world. Yahweh's so just, he wants to free the oppressed in the Old Testament, his chosen ones. But he doesn't free the oppressed Gentiles when they're in power manipulating things. Funny how that works. But he doesn't play favorites, and he's a just God, right? Isn't he? Yeah. Anyway, keep in mind that Yahweh supposedly let the Israelites fall into captivity because they rebelled against him. But now we see him suddenly coming to their rescue because they refuse to pay tribute. You gotta love this book, man. It's such bullshit. We're told that Solomon allegedly extracted tribute from many supposed vassals while he was in power. That story is largely bullshit. Well, it's bullshit in the sense that there was no King Solomon that reigned at that time in Jewland. The real King Solomon, of course, was an Egyptian pharaoh. And so, yeah, he extracted tribute. But nevertheless, you got to love the hypocrisy of this book. It's okay when the chosen ones are in power for them to attack very oppressive tributes, right? That's okay. But whenever the chosen ones are charged taxes, fair taxes like everyone else, oh, no, that's okay for them to uprise and rebel. Just like slavery, right? You never hear the Bible condemn slavery, ever, except in one instance, the story of the Exodus, when his chosen ones are enslaved. That's when he intervenes and sets them free. Other than that, oh no, you may enslave a Gentile for life. They shall be your property. What was that about Yahweh, Bible dupes? He's what? Oh, just right. And he doesn't play favorites either, does he? Are you fucking serious? You see how brain dead these fucking people are, guys? And I know they are because I was one of them. I fell for that goddamn bullshit hook, line, and sinker. What a dumb fucking ass I once was. I made reference to Romans 13, and of course, I did a whole video on it a while back, but just to refresh your memory, let's actually read it because it's so important to put this whole thing in perspective. Understand that Yahweh sanctioned taxation. Again, the story largely isn't true, but doesn't matter. Bible dupes accept it as true. So let's just go with that. And just to show how hypocritical the book is, Yahweh sanctioned King Solomon charging taxes to Gentile nations. No problem. But when Hezekiah, who licked Yahweh's ass, didn't want to pay taxes to the Assyrian king, that was okay. Later in the book of Romans, Paul denounces rebelling against secular authorities, right? And says that you're basically of the devil if you don't, pay tribute, if you don't follow what the secular powers say, that you're basically of the devil because God ordained them. Let's look at what he says here. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, the secular authority, says Paul. For there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God, he said. Whosoever therefore resists this power resists the ordinance of God. And they that resist will receive to themselves damnation. Paul says you're going to be damned if you go against the secular power. And yet, Hezekiah is praised in the Old Testament as a great man of God because he resisted the secular power. Do you see the outrageous in your fucking face hypocrisy? Now, again, understand, Paul here was, just spouting doublespeak. He didn't mean one fucking word of this. He was saying this so as not to arouse suspicion from the Romans because he was, in fact, an insurrectionist. But nevertheless, Bible dupes read everything on the surface and take this as literal. And therefore it is hypocrisy, right? Because this is supposed to be an official teaching of the Bible. We're to follow humbly like the great Jesus, as though he was humble. Follow humbly what the secular leader says because they were all ordained of God. Did Hezekiah do that? Was he following the secular leaders under whose reign he was ruling? No, he was a rebel. Just like Paul, just like the great Jesus, right? They're all insurrectionists. All of them. Anyway, they that resist will receive to themselves damnation, Paul said. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Ha ha! Oh, make note of that one. Secular rulers are never a terror to good. They're only a terror to evil. They're just there to put evil in its place and to reward good doers. Wow, I'm glad Paul clarified that because I had some serious doubts about that. But since Paul now sets the record straight, I can get rid of those paranoid, delusional thoughts I had about the government being a corrupt piece of shit. Wow, man. You gotta be fucking kidding me. Bible dupes lap this up, guys. I've had Bible dupes say, hey, it doesn't matter that you can prove the government is corrupt. God has a purpose behind even this corruption, and we're to support them because God has ordained. Oh, wow. Well, enjoy going through life with your head wedged permanently up your ass. Have a good day. That's when you move on and say, fuck that person. They're gone, baby. Gone. Because of propagandic bullshit like this. Paul went on to say, wilt thou then not be afraid of this power, the secular power? Do that which is good, and you shall have praise of the same. If you do what the secular leader says, you will receive praise from fellow believers and from God himself. But if not, you're a rebel and you're deserving of damnation. For he, the secular ruler, is the minister of God to you for good. Which is why a lot of churches were telling people during the COVID era to roll their sleeves up, just like the propaganda media, right? The churches were just as compliant. Because you're to follow the secular leaders who are only out for your good. They were quoting from Romans 13, guys, to get people to go along with the COVID measures. And without question, that's just what they did. If thou do that which is evil, i.e., rebel against the secular power, be afraid, for he, the secular leader, does not bear the sword in vain. Paul is saying, the secular power is going to cut you down if you don't go along with whatever the secular power says, and you will have deserved what you got. That judgment won't just be from the secular king, it'll be from God himself, giving you damnation that you deserve. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that does evil. So you're doing evil if you don't go along with what the ruler says, who only does good. Wherefore, you must needs be subject not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. Don't follow what the king says just because you're afraid of his wrath being unleashed, but do what the king says because you want to have a clear conscience before God. You're doing the right thing and following what the secular leader says. Cut the goddamn shit. And this is just what King Hezekiah did too, isn't it? Wow. But anyway, here's the real clincher, the real reason why I'm bringing this up. Paul goes on to say, for this reason, pay tribute, pay taxes. Bagged. So now we go back to the story of Hezekiah. Was Hezekiah doing this? Do you see the duplicity here, guys? And again, even though Paul wasn't speaking genuinely here, he wanted his listeners to think he was, and Bible dupes interpret him as speaking literal. You know, they don't realize that he was bullshitting because he was a fucking insurrectionist. This is intended to be taken literal, right? And Bible dupes do. Look at the duplicity. Paul is saying here that you're to obey the secular leader, and he specifically said you are to pay tribute, you are to pay taxes. And yet, the same Bible dupes who say that you're a rebel against God if you don't pay taxes will turn around and praise Hezekiah for refusing to pay taxes and say that he was a great man of God. Oh, you can't have it both ways now, Bible dupes. Which is it? Are we to be subservient to the secular authorities and pay our taxes, even if they're illegal and those taxes are being used for nefarious purposes? Or are we to rebel like King Hezekiah, who was a great follower of Yahweh? Which is it, Bible fucknuts? Anyway, I don't need to belabor this any further, but remember, Peter later followed suit in 2 Peter 2, 10 to 15, for example, and said the same thing that Paul did, adding even more details, more disgusting, vomit-inducing details, compelling his audience to lick the ass of secular rulers. He said the same thing in 1 Peter 2, 13 to 17. Again, I'm not going to read that now because I've covered this before, but it's so outlandish, guys, the contradictions in this goddamn book of bullshit. Anyway, let's take a look at an ancient Assyrian inscription that was written by King Sennacherib's one of his scribes. It was, carved in stone, describing this very rebellion of Hezekiah and how he handled it. Very interesting. It mentions Hezekiah in this inscription. Here's how it reads. In the course of my campaign, Beth Dagon, Joppa, Ben Barka, Azuru, the cities of Isidka, which had not quickly thrown themselves at my feet, I besieged, I took, I carried away their spoil. The governors, chiefs, and people of Ekron, who had cast Padi, their king, according to Assyrian rite and oath, into iron chains, and had, in hostile manner, given him to Hezekiah of Judah. There you go. He mentions Hezekiah of Judah. He shut him up in prison, feared in their hearts. The kings of Egypt called with their archers, chariots, and horses of the king of Meluki, a force without number, and came to their help before the city of Ethka. They arranged their battle array, appealing to their weapons. With the help of Ashur, my lord, I fought with them and accomplished their defeat. The chief of the chariots of the king of Meluki, my hands took alive in the fight. Elteka and Temoth the first. Oh, I'm sorry. I read that wrong. Eleka and Temoth, I besieged. I read the I as the first. I besieged. I took and carried away their spoil. He's just naming all of the kings and all of the provinces that he conquered that weren't willingly surrendering to him. One of which, of course, was Hezekiah of Judah. To the city of Ekron I went. The governors and princes who had committed a transgression I killed and bound their corpses on poles around the city. He put their dead bodies on display, which was a common thing in ancient times. The inhabitants of the city who had committed sin and evil I counted as spoil. To the rest of them who had committed no sin and wrong, who had no guilt, I spoke peace. In other words, if they resisted me, I put their bodies up on poles as a warning. What'll happen to you if you do the same. Those who didn't pose any trouble, I brought them peace. Padi, their king, I brought forth from the city of Jerusalem. Upon the throne of lordship over them, I placed him. In other words, he replaced Hezekiah with one of his minions, because Hezekiah was a little prick, right? Funny how Mr. Yahweh, though, didn't reward Hezekiah for licking his ass. Hezekiah did all these reforms, right? You know how they would get around that. They would say, oh, well, God didn't reward that king with victory because of the children of Israel themselves. Often they would go in the reverse of that, even though the children of Israel were licking Yahweh's ass. If the king rebelled, Yahweh punished all of Israel because of the king. Oh, well, that makes sense, doesn't it? Nevertheless, though, this is how it worked in Jewland in the Not So Holy book. They would just go back and forth with bullshit like this, always making an excuse up and showing that God is still in charge no matter what went wrong. But they would literally resort to, many times, to having all of Israel get punished just because the king supposedly made made a bad decision. So Yahweh punished all of Israel? Really? Really now? The passage went on to say, the tribute of my lordship I laid upon him, but Hezekiah of Judah, who had not submitted to my yoke, I besieged 46 of his strong cities, fortresses, and small cities of their environs, without number, and by casting down the walls and advancing the enemies by an assault of the light-armed soldiers, by breaches, by striking, and by axes I took them. He kicked some serious ass. 200,150 men, young and old, male and female, horses, mules, asses, camels, oxen, and sheep, without number, I brought out from thence. I counted them as spoil. He looted all of Jewland, right? Good for him. Hezekiah himself I shut up in a cage like a bird in Jerusalem. His royal city, the walls I fortified against him, and whosoever came out of the gates of that city I turned back. His cities, which I had plundered, I divided from his hand and gave them to Mitinti, king of Ashdod, to Patti, his minion that he put in place of Hezekiah, king of Ekron, and took to Silbaal, king of Gaza, and thus diminished his territory. To the former tribute paid yearly, I added the tribute of alliance of my lordship and laid that upon him. In other words, I punished the people doublefold in taxes because of their rebellion. Hezekiah himself, he said, was overwhelmed by the fear of the brightness of my lordship. The Arabians and his other faith warriors, whom, as a defense for Jerusalem, his royal city, he had brought in, fell into fear. In other words, all of his mercenaries that he had hired, were of no use to him. That would include, the Egyptian alliance. With 30 talents of gold and 80 talents of silver, precious stones, Gukli Dagasi, large lapis lazuli, Gukli Ladasi, I guess is some precious stone. Couches of ivory, thrones of ivory, usu wood, boxwood of every kind, a heavy treasure, in other words, he's saying. And his daughters, his women of the palace, his concubines, the young men and young women to Nineveh, the city of my lordship. He brought them all there. He took the booty. I caused to be brought after me all of these things, and he sent his ambassadors to give tribute and to pay homage. Again, you got to love it, guys. He put this son of a bitch in his place. But where was the great Yahweh to reward the great Hezekiah with victory? The priesthood, who didn't want an alliance with the Egyptians, probably would say, well, that's because you didn't follow Yahweh's orders. You allied yourselves with the Egyptians, and that's why Yahweh gave you over. When in fact, the Egyptians added to their entourage and should have ensured them more of a victory, and yet they still lost, right? The great Yahweh, even though Hezekiah licked his ass, didn't come through for him on this one. Here we see that Hezekiah did indeed employ the services of Egypt against Assyria, or the Arabs, as it's stated here, but to no avail. So this part of the biblical narrative actually is accurate. We have this inscription, uh, confirming the veracity of this story. Not that every detail is accurate, but overall, this particular part of the biblical narrative is pretty accurate. Obviously, though, these Egyptians that allied themselves with the Hebes must have forgotten their own history, or not realized that these are the same bastards, the descendants of the bastards that raped and pillaged them centuries earlier as the Hyksos. Anyway, Hezekiah made a subterranean water conduit known as Hezekiah's Tunnel, which was designed to help Jerusalem resist conquest by the Assyrians by supplying the city with water during the siege. It was made by hand, excavating through solid bedrock from the spring of Gideon all the way to the pool of Siloam inside of the city walls of Jerusalem, over a third of a mile away. You can bet, though, he employed others to do it. He didn't personally, nor did his chosen ones do it. They didn't have the skills to do this. But it's a pretty impressive structure. It was dug from both ends, and then they met in the middle. And it's a perfectly straight line. So, the people that they hired to do this knew what they were doing. It didn't start at one point and just go in one straight line. It started at two opposite ends, and they met in the middle. It was discovered, I don't know, back in the late 19th century, I guess, confirming that, yeah, there is a biblical record of this tunnel, and they did find it. It does actually exist, just like we know Hezekiah existed because we have record of him in the ancient annals of Assyria. Hezekiah appointed two teams of men digging, again, from both sides inward, who eventually met in the middle and that lined up perfectly. So these people he hired, the Gentiles he hired, knew what they were doing. They always have Gentiles do their dirty work, right? Get them to build their temple for them. They're fixing to have Trump build their temple for them in the next 4 years, guys, with our tax dollars. Yeah, you watch. It was probably slave labor. I mean, there were some times, according to the Not So Holy Book, where they hired people and underpaid them, didn't come through with the promises they made, right? Like Solomon fucking over the Phoenician king, King Hiram. But more often than not, it was slave labor that they employed. Don't forget, a Gentile you may enslave for life. He shall be your property. Anyway, we're also told that Hezekiah had built a fortification wall, which resulted in the destruction of several homes to make way for it. He literally tore down a bunch of homes to build this wall. We're told about this in Isaiah 22, verse 10. And ye have numbered the houses of Jerusalem, and the houses have you broken down to fortify the wall. Archaeologists actually discovered this wall, and they found that there were indeed foundations of homes underneath this wall. So there is truth to this part of the story as well. Anyway, no surprise, not long after the Assyrians had laid siege to Jerusalem, Sennacherib is said to have been assassinated, allegedly by his sons. Really now? I think we can see tribal fingerprints all over that one, right? Anyway, regarding this assassination, look what we read in the Not So Holy Book, 2 Kings 19, verses 6 and 7. It says, this is Yahweh speaking here. Be not afraid of the words that you have heard. a threat given by Sennacherib to invade Jerusalem, right? By which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Behold, I will put a spirit in him, and he shall hear news, and shall return to his own land, and I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. So here's Yahweh giving a prophecy. I'm going to make sure this king gets taken down. They killed him, guys. And here's reference to Yahweh being the one who did it. Yeah, Yahweh did it, all right. Hezekiah had his minions go in and assassinate the fucking king, obviously. And all because he refused to pay the king tribute, and so the king raided Jerusalem. The Jewish version of revenge is, we're going to get you back for not letting us get away with our crimes. Not giving us special privileges that you don't give to anyone else. How dare you? You're our enemy, and you're God's enemy. And they would write it off as God being behind it, as always. But let's notice what happened next. Oh, you can really see their hand at play here. During the siege of Jerusalem, conveniently, an Ethiopian king, obviously at the behest of Hezekiah. They had this planned out ahead of time. They made a deal with this Ethiopian king. Don't forget, there was a huge Jewish puppeteer settlement in Ethiopia. A lot of the Nubians that had contracted previously with the Zios, right? There was a black Hebrew Israelite community there, if you will, that were, allies of theirs. So this was all arranged ahead of time. Look, it's most likely that Sennacherib is going to invade Jerusalem because I'm not paying taxes. So as soon as you hear of a siege in Jerusalem, we want you to come in and attack. And that's exactly what happened. This attack was launched right there against the Assyrian seizing army. Sennacherib was forced to leave Jerusalem to go back to the head of his empire in Nineveh to defend it, fearing that there might be an attack being launched there. He left behind a small army to maintain the siege and to overcome the relatively small Ethiopian army. This army wasn't intended to overthrow it necessarily, but just to create havoc so that the king would in fact leave, which is just what happened. It was not long after this that we're told this plague broke out, killing 185,000 Assyrians that had laid siege to the city. You get it? So they had, let's get the king out of there. And then shortly after that, of course, going back to Nineveh is when the king was assassinated. They had this all planned out ahead of time. I'm sure the number wasn't 185,000 that were killed, but then again, who knows? Maybe it was. But according to the Not So Holy Book, this plague was unleashed. How convenient. Oh, I'm sure they did unleash a plague. It probably killed a fair number of people. The Bible always exaggerates and distorts, right? So who knows how many were. But look at this, guys. They had this all thought out ahead of time. And this was attributed to Yahweh. Funny, though, how Yahweh would have to go through this roundabout way to supposedly bring victory. Why didn't he prevent the siege or if not prevent it, ensure that the siege wasn't successful if he was protecting, King Hezekiah? What a joke. Anyway, so yeah, it was not long after that Sennacherib got assassinated, and now the Assyrian threat was removed from the chosen ones. What a familiar pattern. Unbelievable, man. And so, on the occasions that their plots succeeded, Yahweh was blessing them. On the occasions that their plots failed, well, Yahweh's cursing us because either the king wasn't following Yahweh and thus all of Israel got cursed, or, the other way around, whatever. They would just create the narrative to fit whatever suited them at any given moment. But always, Yahweh was the guiding hand in all of this, right? When it was just their sleazy wheeling and dealing, behind the scenes, shekel handling over to some of their minions to do their bidding for them. Just as sleazy then as they ever have been, right? Still the same kind of plotting that goes on today, isn't it? Nothing has changed, guys. For thousands of years, this is the shit that they've been pulling and getting away with, and they're still pulling it and getting away with it. Except on a global scale today. Anyway, after the murder of Sennacherib, that didn't bring the Assyrian Empire to an end, but it certainly staved off some of the troubles that they were getting from Sennacherib. But it looks like they exacted their ultimate revenge decades later in 627 BC, after the death of King Ashurbanipal. Revolts broke out all across the Assyrian Empire, which led to its demise. This was all Zio planned, you can bet your ass. This is their classic modus operandi, right? Their little calling card. In the wake of the confusion of the king dying, nobody to replace him, the empire was already destabilized, right? Now let's finish the job by launching uprisings all across the empire. And sure enough, that pushed it over the edge completely and brought to an end the reign of Assyria. Classic Zio tactic, just like during the COVID fiasco. They knew Americans were on the edge. They wanted to take America down. So they unleashed the BLM Antifa riots, right? Hoping that would be the final blow to take America down when it was already down to begin with because of the COVID bullshit. Didn't work, though. Didn't work the way they planned. But this is a classic Zio tactic. This is what they did with Assyria, guys. The king dies. They set off all of these uprisings all over the empire. But just to ensure that the empire would fall, not only the death of the king, which I'm sure they facilitated, and all of the uprisings, they also, I'm sure, orchestrated this with having Jewish advisors with all of these other kings that they had sent in to attack the Assyrians. The Babylonians, the Medes, and the Persians sent forces in to collectively finish off Assyria. But as the story goes, it wasn't long before the Zio started wreaking havoc in Babylon as well, which, kicked their ass for a time, but ultimately they took Babylon down too, didn't they? The Persians came along later that they used to help take Babylon down, but eventually the Persians became trouble for them, and so they had the Greeks come in, and, on it goes. Fucking unbelievable. Look how much they have fucked with our history, guys. Every history page for the past 3,500 plus years has been shitted all over by these bastards. Our world would have been a completely different place, a much better place, without the intervention of these fucks. Our pages wouldn't be stained with one war story after another. Oh, there's undoubtedly there still would have been a war here or there, but nothing like what we see it now, right? It wouldn't be war after war. It would be one, inspiring story of good story after another. Kings ruling over lands pleasantly and helping the poor and building civilization up and everybody living cooperatively and comfortably. Sure, because of human frailties, there would be some exceptions, but overall, the rule would have been peace and harmony, pleasant, prosperous living for everybody. You wouldn't have this shit, guys, except for these fucking bastards. Their usurious bullshit that only serves to parasite off of, to suck off of everyone else, to tear down civilization, to prevent its progress. Remember the Marcus Eli Ravage quote, right? What glories would have been yours had we not interfered? in your affairs. Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, let's now look at the dispersion that, we've been told about had occurred at the time that the Assyrians had sacked Jerusalem and the 10 tribes were dispersed. No, they weren't. They dispersed themselves. They weren't forced to flee into other lands, always making themselves out to be victims, right? This was part of their plan. If we get sacked, what we're going to do is we're going to resort to plan B, and groups of us are going to scatter across the countryside, and we're going to infiltrate, every nation and take over the world that way. This was the strategy in the first century. They were hoping to do the same thing militaristically to take over Rome. That didn't work, and so they resorted to their old strategy of the time of the so-called dispersion. They realized, okay, we got to do the infiltration thing. We can't do it militarily like we wanted. We're going to have to do it the slower way. It sucks. We're not going to see the fruition of this in our lifetime. It's probably going to take centuries, but it will be effective. We will achieve our goal that way. We'll infiltrate. And so they infiltrated Rome. They set up Christianity as the official religion of the empire. They took it over that way through the priestly and the kingly line, right? Priestly running the church, kingly running the thrones. They took over Rome from within. It's a slower process, but it did work. And so that's what went on here with the so-called 10-tribe dispersion. Record of this is found in the apocryphal book of 2nd Esdras, chapter 13, verses 40 to 45, which provides some very interesting, tantalizing details about this matter. Here's what it says. These are the 10 tribes. Yeah, 10 tribes, whatever. These are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hosea or Hoshea. Talked about him in the last video. The king whom Salmanassar, the king of Assyria, led away captive. And he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. They were taken into captivity. But they took counsel amongst themselves that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt before. Did you catch that? Were they forced into other lands? No. It said they took counsel. They conspired amongst themselves and decided to go to a land that no one knew before. It's pretty obvious what this land is. Can you guess? It's the land the Zios had always taken refuge to whenever they ran into trouble and wanted to get away from taxation and could plan their strategy for world domination, build up an army, whatever. Remember all the havoc I talked about? The Zios wreaking in the Americas, guys? They infiltrated the Mayan Empire, tried to take that down. They infiltrated the Anasazi. They took down the Mississippian, the Adena, the Hopewell, on and on and on. This is exactly what's being referred to here, but I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. Let me finish the passage. So it says that they took counsel among themselves. They conspired that they should leave the multitude of the heathen. Let's get away from these Assyrians, these heathens. We got to go away somewhere where we can regroup and replan our strategy and go further into a farther country where never mankind dwelt. We got to go to a place far removed where none of these heathen cultures exist. A land that's uninhabited or mostly uninhabited, right? Some natives are there, but it's mostly barren land. We can go there and set up shop. For through that country, it says, there was a great way to go. How? Through their old buddies in the copper trading enterprise. It was only a few centuries earlier that they worked with, the Phoenicians, the the Celts, the Norse, right? They hijacked their trading empire. These people were still around, and they could just strike up a deal with them, offer them some shekels to hitch a ride with them, and come across the Atlantic and go back to this land that they already knew had existed, had been a refuge for them in previous ages, right? For through that country, there was a great way to go. There was an avenue opened for them. Yeah, they're old buddies from the copper trade days. Namely, of a year and a half. It took a year and a half for them to undertake this voyage. And the same region is called Arsareth. Arsareth. Where is this Arsareth? It took a journey of a year and a half for them to reach it. Very far away, right? A good deal of that journey, of course, consisted of them getting together, enough ships and paying off the shekels to take the voyage, as well as actually to sail it, right? They couldn't just get in the ships and go. The whole process took them a year and a half, but they finally got this entourage put together, sailed across the Atlantic to reach the land of Arsareth. Interestingly enough, the JewishEncyclopedia.com website states that Columbus identified the New World that he had landed on in 1492 as Arsareth. Here's the Jewish Encyclopedia stating that Arsareth was a reference to the Americas. Of course it was. This was always their place of refuge. For example, I've read this before. At the time of the 66 Jewish war against Rome, right, which culminated in the 70 AD sacking of Jerusalem. 4 years that war waged on. Josephus talked about a large group of Jews boarding ships and heading across the Great Sea, i.e. the Atlantic. Here's how we put it. The Hebrews fled across the sea, the Atlantic, to a land unknown to them before. Oh no, it was known all right. He's talking about the Americas, guys, or Arsareth, which the Hebes had fled to at the time of the siege of the Assyrians. So there's your dispersion. Some of them went off into different countries and infiltrated them, yes, but a good many of them, we're told, went to this unknown, essentially uninhabited land across the Great Sea, the Americas, guys, which is why we see not only traces of ancient Hebes in the Americas, but traces that span many centuries. We know they were here in the first century, which we just read about from Josephus, right? He said that they came here in the first century to escape the Romans from the Jewish-Roman wars. We know that there was a settlement here then because of the Los Lumis stone. There was a bunch of Bedouin-type buildings, homes that they had found the remains of. Archaeologists had dug up. And they wrote in the first century block Hebrew language, the writing system, it was only in place in the first century. So this definitely dates to the first century. So we know that they were here then. We know they were here even earlier from some of the mounds that have been dug up and Hebrew inscriptions that were found on some stones there. So they were here centuries before that. We know they were part of the copper trade going back to the 12th century and beyond. I talked about, for example, Barry Fell, who was an epigrapher from Harvard University. He found an inscription written in Ogham, which was probably put on display at a trading post, and it read "No usury allowed," dating to the copper trade era. Anyways, so the Americas were used by them again and again and again as a place of refuge to flee to. They would just buddy up with the Phoenicians or the Celts, whatever, offer them some shekels. Hey, take us across. And so at this particular time, it was known as Arsareth. It was known by other names at other times, but nevertheless, guys, there you go. That's where probably the bulk of the Hebes that were taken out of Jerusalem and brought, to Nineveh. That's probably where the bulk of them wound up in the ancient Americas. Very interesting. All right, guys. Anyways, that concludes that discussion. Hope you enjoyed it. Lots more to come. We'll catch you in the next video. Take care.